Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is Ukraine War Front 9, no it's not, news update for the 18th of January 2024. It's the second part thereof, and actually there's so much content and a lot of stuff to discuss, and I know I produce too much content and not all of you can watch it, and that might be frustrating for some of you want to. Please watch me on 1.25, 1.5, 1.75, 2 times speed if you're that skillful. YouTube gives you that ability. I am going to have to separate my geopolitical video out from this military aid video because there's just too much to talk about. I do apologize. I really don't actually like doing too much content, but there's just too much to talk about. Right, we're going to start with Germany. So I want to talk about Germany, France, and then everything else, but I also want to play you a little bit from Ukraine, the latest regarding Germany and France and how we understand issues going on between the EU and those countries, the kind of bilateral versus the EU approach to aid, and why those two countries disagree with each other and what's been going on recently. Anyway, German Bundestag did not support the supply of Taurus to Ukraine. So they put this to the vote. It was the opposition that put this to the vote in the Bundestag, and out of 666 deputies, 178 voted for, 485 against and 3 abstained. So this is not a successful vote for Taurus to go to Ukraine. Now, lots of people have jumped on this. Lots of really strong pro-Ukrainian voices. I've been speaking to people who have been like really upset about this. But actually, don't be too upset about this. And here's the reason why. And I'll say it from a few different points of view. So this is someone just replying to that post. The vote is misleading. It's a political game within German party politics. Many who are for the delivery voted against. The resolution is not binding anyway, and it would only put pressure on Scholz. A new resolution might come soon. This is a Google Translate from Yehil Chernev, who says, just contacted my friends in the Bundestag about the news that German parliament has allegedly refused to hand over Taurus missiles to us. Everything turned out to be simpler. One, it was a separate draft law of a part of the opposition, which it wanted to put to a vote without agreeing with the others. The bill was rejected not on its merits, but because of procedural violations and attempts to use it for narrow party PR. Two, the plan to submit a joint bill of all factions to the Bundestag remains in force. Most likely, voting for it will take place in February. Okay, and now let's talk about what German aid to Ukraine has to say. Remember, I have interviewed him a couple of times. I spoke with him on Tochny. He has a big old piece to say about this. So his comment is, in this tweet, I'm getting a bit personal for once because I need to get something off my chest. I hope everyone is okay with that. I think today was perfect proof of several things we should all think about. Although Germany announced military aid deliveries to Ukraine today, as it does almost every week, which includes the announcement of a further delivery of 15 Cheetah Spags, so Gepards, and 20 Marder 1A3 IFVs, this day remains in the minds of most people only because of this vote in the Bundestag. In contrast to almost every supporter of Ukraine, Germany supplies military aid to Ukraine every week. According to current figures, military aid to Ukraine will amount to 8 billion euros this year. Germany is providing 50% of all aid coming from the EU. So what German aid to Ukraine is upset about is that, and he's personally had people attacking him, I think, on somehow representing Germany. People going mental about the Germans not saying yes to Taurus and forgetting all the other amazing stuff that they're doing. And he goes to great lengths to communicate what Germany is doing accurately to people so that they get a proper understanding, and yet everyone's forgetting all that and just going nuts about Taurus. He says, nevertheless, all people can think about today is that the Bundestag today rejected the CDU's motion to supply Taurus to Ukraine. It was clear that the governing parties would vote no today. In their eyes, the CDU, so these are the opposition, that's Merkel's old party, is just a political move by the opposition, which is being carried out on the back of Ukraine. In addition, a positive result today would have had no influence. Only the government, or rather the Chancellor, so Scholz, and the Federal Security Council have the final say on the Taurus delivery. I would like to make it very clear that I am in favour of delivering the Taurus cruise missiles to Ukraine. I'm 100% in favour of that. Nevertheless, this motion is in this form was so wrong today, and I can therefore fully understand the vote of the governing parties. Let's try to see it from the perspective of the governing parties. If they vote in favour of the motion and it actually turns out to be positive, they have a lot of media hype on the same day. quote, government divided, pressure on the chancellor increased, government majority for delivery, etc. But the vote doesn't achieve anything directly anyway. The fact that the governing parties voted unitedly against it at least shows that they are united. Nevertheless, they get all the hate, win-win for the opposition. I am by no means saying that the whole Taurus issue is just theatre on the part of the CDU. For many, it is certainly a genuine desire to help Ukraine more intensively, also with Taurus cruise missiles. But this is also the case with the Greens, the FDP, and even parts of the SPD. After all, leading figures in the Taurus movement with the government parties announced today that they themselves are already working on a motion to be submitted by February at the latest, which will include the delivery of Taurus cruise missiles. Of course, this does not directly mean that Taurus will actually go to Ukraine, but back to the actual vote. Seeing the reactions to my tweet with the voting result, honestly, that really shocks me. I've seen so many insults, threats, Nazi comparisons and more today. And not just on my account. Yes, there's a lot at stake, but you have to set boundaries somewhere. I mean, this makes me really sad, actually. He's such a strong advocate for aid to Ukraine. Why shoot the messenger? It makes me really sad that everyone needs to think about the fact how quickly such a vote, even if it didn't actually have any decision-making power, brings out the worst in so many people. People who just a few hours ago thanked Germany wholeheartedly for the last delivery of weapons to Ukraine. In the blink of an eye, the view of Germany changes. But this whole PR shit show could be over so quickly. All it needs is a yes from the Chancellor. Or if it really fails because of other parties, then he must finally say so. In my opinion, and also from what other people tell me, the image of Germany has changed massively in terms of support for Ukraine. I agree with that. Some even go so far as to credit me with a conscience, even if I personally wouldn't go that far. But all this shows us one thing very clearly, that people are very much guided by their emotions and ignore the rational side. Hurrah. Absolutely correct. Never mind that Germany is currently the world leader in supporting Ukraine. No country, not even the USA, is currently supplying more to Ukraine. Nevertheless, a country like Germany is criticized and hated internationally more than France, for example, which only provides a small proportion of German military aid. We're going to talk about this in a second. But by delivering the really important, and I am very thankful for this, Scalp EG, France is building up so many plus points that most people don't care. So fascinating that people will forgive France for X, Y, and Z because the Scalp EG are such a good PR weapon. And could be why they're providing more of them. It's like, yeah, we don't have to do all these billions of worth of aid because we can just provide these scalps, and people get onto that and they see the success. Don't even get me started on Italy, etc. But this tweet is not there to criticize other countries. So if you remember, Olaf Scholz came out recently and criticized without naming them people aren't pulling their weight, but the implications were France, Italy, and Spain as being the next biggest supporters of the EU monetarily. But yeah, so this is absolutely on point from German aid to Ukraine. I would just like to point out that Germany is actually doing for Ukraine, how so many people don't seem to care, and how the focus is currently only on the Taurus. Many people don't seem to care about anything else. I know exactly why I usually avoid the subject of Taurus if I can, being directly exposed to all this hate today. Today was one of the very few days where I just wanted to switch off Twitter and never switch it on again. Please, guys, go and show your love for German aid to Ukraine. He's an absolutely fabulous guy. Please just let him know that the work he does is so important. And indeed, the work that Germany is doing just in general. You know, let's forget about this, the Taurus thing and wonder why that might be taking place and what the issues are. But in general, Germany are doing an absolutely fabulous job of trying to pick up some of the slack left by the impasse in Congress in the US. And that also makes me angry, not just at some users here, but I'm also angry at Scholz. I invest so much in this project, apart from all the money, so many hours spent on research, reporting, programming work, etc. And I'll be thinking about that for the next few days, and will be reminded of every day in this shitty vote, which would be absolutely avoidable if we finally delivered Taurus to Ukraine. But anyway, I don't want to get too carried away now. Thanks to everyone who's actually read this far by. Okay, so what we need to understand is perspective, and also understand what's going on there. That was a vote that didn't hold power and was a party political vote that had they got their way, yes, Taurus wouldn't have necessarily gone anyway, and it would have put all that pressure on Scholz, and it would have actually signified a bit of a government revolt. and a success for the opposition. And so what the ruling coalition needs to do is control the narrative, which is, no, you ain't going to tell us what to do. And then take that subsequent proposition back to the Bundestag by February, and then on their terms get support for Taurus ratified, so that then Scholz is pressured into providing Taurus. So I think we just really need to understand that. I was speaking to Terry last night to say, I was going to talk about this tomorrow, but it's not as bad as people think, and for exactly these reasons here. And remember, this came on a day where this was overshadowed. What's overshadowed is, as German aid to the Ukraine said, is first of all what's been delivered and then what's been subsequently pledged. So delivered 25 Hydrogen drones, RQ-35. These are really good drones. 8 FFG APCs. These look like this. So those are the armored personnel carriers. That are fantastic looking bits of vehicle. I'm sure they're very decent. 16 Mercedes-Benz Zetros trucks for water or fuel, 5 border protection vehicles, 3 regular vehicles, ammunition for Leopard 185s, material for explosive ordnance disposal, 50 satellite communication terminals, most likely SatCube, 1,804 helmets, 500 LED lights. Might be these Falke light systems, and then pledged on top of that another 124 RQ-35 Hydrogen drones, 15 Gepards, likely from the Jordanian, the Cheetah version with a better radar, announced by the German MOD in June last year, 20 Marder 1A3, 20 further 1A3 IFVs, 40 Mercedes-Benz Zetros trucks for water or fuel, 20 Mercedes-Benz Zetros refrigerator trucks, 2,500 combat helmets, 1,500 LED lights. So this is super great. I mean, this is really good. We've got meaningful equipment, stuff that other countries aren't providing at the moment. Germany is providing them and pledging more. Right, this is just super good. Yet it's been overshadowed by people going mental about the Taurus missiles. Right, now let's move on to France. This is a step in the right direction, and actually, there's some very meaningful rhetoric coming out of this. Not just rhetoric, but hopefully rhetoric that reflects what's happening in France. France is to produce 78 Caesar howitzers for Ukraine. These are the big self-propelled howitzers with that Denmark have provided, France have provided some, etc., etc. Right? Obviously, France make these. I think they come in a 6 and 8 wheel version. This is coming from the defense minister. 78 are going to be made by France. I believe 6 are being bought by Ukraine. So Ukraine are buying 6. Be interesting to know who is funding the other 72. The Caesar self-propelled howitzers, the crown jewel of the French defense industry, are already in service of the Ukrainian forces and being used successfully on the battlefield. There's some complaints they're actually quite big and therefore very easy to acquire as targets in a way that some towed artillery that you can hide in a tree line isn't. However, pros and cons. Ukraine obviously need a bunch of these. So Thomas Steiner says, excellent, France is finally putting its economy on a war footing too, about time. And everyone in Europe needs to do the same, not just to help Ukraine. We're going to need those weapons ourselves soon too. Right. War footing. So what's going on there? Well, France will produce 78 Caesar self-propelled artillery units for Ukraine, according to Defense Minister Sébastien Lecornu. According to him, I think this is from Le Monde, according to him, Ukraine is ready to partially pay for production. Quote, France will initiate funding to train others. Ukraine itself is ready to provide part of its own resources. It has just purchased 6 Caesar units and its own expense to launch this initiative, the minister said in an interview with, Le Parisien, sorry, not Le Monde. Le Monde says here, and he noted that France is introducing a war economy regime. What does that mean? But my goodness, that's super important. Obviously, we need some details. What does it mean that France is now going on to war footing? Le Monde also writes that France has increased the production of ammunition for Ukraine from 1,000 a month to 2,000. So it's already doubled ammunition production. And the goal is to get to 3,000, which is to triple ammunition production. Now, obviously, that's not as much as, say, the US, which is now at 14,000, or probably more than that now, looking to get to 28,000 a month. France is hoping to get to 3,000 a month, but obviously it's about where you started and where you're ending up. And it could be that France's ammunition production is never going to be in the same kind of ballpark as the US production, but it all helps, right? And moving to produce triple what you were is super important. Getting onto a war footing is interesting rhetoric there from the French. Now, Le Monde reports that on Tuesday, French President Macron announced sending several hundred AASM Hammer-powered gliding bombs, in addition to the 40 Scalps. So remember, there are these 40 Scalp EGs that would take them to 90 Scalps in total. There's some conversation about the 45 being left that won't be upgraded. Some people saying that there won't be any of those. I don't know. There are different claims, so there could be some more coming in the future, possibly. But what I found really interesting were these Hammer guided glide bombs. These are basically like your JDAMs, but French produced. So France will begin supplying, now get this, 50 of these per month, every month for 2024. That is absolutely staggering, right? It's just really good news. Now, these are, as mentioned, these are guided glide bombs, rather like JDAM and FAB 500 and whatnot. It stands for Highly Agile Modular Munition Extended Range. France will deliver 50 of those for every month of 2024. Merci bien. That is really very good news. Now, what would they be used for? There's some questions about that. I was wondering actually what airframe would send them. So what was really interesting is that the French Foreign Minister Le Cornu went to Kiev, met with the Ukrainians. Then Emmanuel Macron came out and made this announcement about, well, first of all, on the back of Le Cornu going to Kiev, we suddenly had a conversation about Mirage 2000Ds. So suddenly the French were talking about, and the Ukrainians were talking about French planes again. So originally we heard that it was the Ukrainians only wanted 2 airframes, and it was mainly going to be F-16s and then Gripens. They didn't want to complicate logistics and training and everything. But then, I think the top 4 were, in order of preference, F-16s, Gripens, Typhoon, the Eurofighter, and then the Mirage at the bottom. But then now this discussion involving Mirages was interesting with Le Cornu. And then a day or two later, Macron says, we're going to give Scalp EGs, another 40 of them, and then these bombs. Well, what's going to fire these bombs? Well, they can certainly be dropped, one would presume, by the Mirage 2000Ds. Okay, you stockpiling these for Mirage to come online? Is that something that's been happening quietly that we don't know about, that's suddenly going to appear? Or can these be adapted to Su-24s and F-16s, etc., etc.? I don't know. War Vehicle Tracker here says, why are people so surprised? This is very similar to the JDAM ER, which is just we weren't expecting it, which Ukraine already has. And also, I think Ukraine has FAB bombs as well, just without the UMPK glide kits. This won't do anything new, neither will it destroy radars because of its 50-kilometer range. Bombs like these are literally built for wars like Afghanistan or Iraq, where you have 90 to 100% air superiority and can fly past the front line for deeper strikes, which neither side can do here. This won't show Russians a new medicine. They have been tasting JDAMs already. Yeah, I don't know that we've seen an awful lot of them for a number of reasons. I don't know whether these missiles will have similar issues to JDAM. Also, in terms of being able to be jammed and so on and so forth. Also, I suspect it will be used like JDAMs in Bakhmut to hit houses with Russians inside, trenches, fortified positions, maybe advancing vehicles, but I doubt even a 50-kilometer range can be used because for that 50-kilometer range, you'd have to drop them from the front, which puts you into anti-aircraft zones. Also, to get the most range, you need to be higher up, and that's a bit of an issue. It gets you into AA range. So he then just finishes. What is very positive is that they're going to get 50 of these per month, if it's true, because Ukraine didn't get the same luxury with JDAMs. All of that, I think, is very interesting, and this is worthy of lots of conversation in the threads below. Please have at it. Now, what I think we all need to get some clarity on is what's going on in terms of funding for Germany. Germany's doing a lot of things bilaterally outside of the EU. That's really annoyed the EU, or at least Thierry Breton, who is one of the main guys inside the treasury of the EU. But is he coming back at that from being French within the EU? And so what are the dynamics? And let's have a bit of an explainer. And this does a really good job of that. This is one of the team for Ukraine The Latest.
Put it, what's going on? Why are France and Germany falling out with the EU at the moment? What's your reading of this situation?
Yes, the Thierry Breton comments, which were actually made on Monday but have seemingly slipped through everyone's radar, are quite interesting in as such as I've been speaking this week to multiple people in the EU circles, in NATO circles, about aid to Ukraine, because it's, as everyone knows, is a big subject going into this. And I think if you were to sort of speak to some of the bigger donors, if you look at the Brits, the Americans, and they would be actually argue that Germany is doing just fine and France isn't quite pulling its weight. But these aren't going to be comments that are ever made in public. You're never going to get Joe Biden, Rishi Sunak go and have a go at France. Even when Olaf Scholz the other day encouraged EU members to do more, he did not name names or call out any names. You could just extrapolate who he was talking about by matching people's public commitments and their donations made in public to the size of their economy. And this has seemingly pitted France and Germany together. We know France, before last night, before Emmanuel Macron announced that he would send an extra 40 Scalp or Storm Shadow missiles to Ukraine, which is worth about 55 million euros on our calculators. And he said several hundred bombs, but he didn't tell us what bombs they were, so we can't really work out. Before that, France had donated around 540 million euros in military aid directly to Ukraine. That's bilateral, not through the EU mechanism, before the start of the invasion. That's according to the tracker kept by the German think tank, the Kiel Institute. Whereas Germany has committed 17 billion, so a lot more. Well, yeah, an incredible amount more. But I think what we have to remember here is Thierry Breton is the man who Emmanuel Macron sent to be a European commissioner. So he is simply defending Paris and what has become I wouldn't even call it a row. It's not that far gone yet. It's a slight exchange of words, exchange of ideas, a discussion that's probably being played out with slightly raised voices about how do you use the EU to gift weapons to Ukraine, or how do you use bilateral? So the main reason for this is, and the reason for France's donations, bilateral donations being so small, is because they do the bulk of theirs through the EU pot, and they basically allows them to claim back a certain percentage of things, of the cash that they donate in weapons. So every time they send an artillery gun or something like that to Ukraine, they can claim back. It varies between 75 and 90% of the price of the weapon, depends on market values, etc., and how easy it is to replace. So that's why their bilateral aid is very low. And currently on the table in the EU is this idea that there's going to be a 20 billion European peace facility, it's called, where basically it would give Ukraine 5 billion a year in weapons over 4 years. But Germany has argued and is basically seeking to reduce its contributions to this fund. It argues that bilateral contributions to Ukraine should count against what is expected to be paid into the funds. Germany, as it stands, pays in a quarter of that pot, so it would be expected to pay 5 billion into the EU coffer, as well as what it does bilaterally. So basically Germany saying, look, we've already done our commitments bilaterally, why should we also fund the EU doing it too? Well, EU member states, because essentially what it's being used, the pot's being used a lot, is people sending their old Soviet legacy kit or kit they don't want anymore to Ukraine, and then using the EU funds to buy new weapons for themselves, which is, I guess, plausible if you're a national military leader, but not something that other taxpayers would want to be spending on. But yeah, so it's actually quite interesting. And so this is what an EU diplomat told our colleague James Crisp, who has done up the Thierry Breton quotes into a story today. And this diplomat said, a broader group of member states don't mind Scholz urging them to do more. That urging stings for France, which hasn't done as much. That is why Thierry Breton's rebuke has come. It's a defence of his national government back home. But it's just rather interesting to constantly hear these sort of bickerings about how do we do it. And basically, as well, you've got to look in the picture of France, Emmanuel Macron, Thierry Breton especially, wants to create the EU into an autonomous military power, because it understands that Donald Trump has made threats to leave NATO or basically not come to Europe's defence if it's attacked in the past. So what is interesting is that basically Thierry Breton and Paris would like more to be done through the EU, so it's built as its own power rather than bilateral arrangements, which then sort of is seen to fragment the bloc slightly. But I'll stop on Thierry Breton.
And you can really understand that. I mean, that's a really good, clear exposition. Was also like talking to this strategic positioning of the EU vis-a-vis what's going on in American politics, and if Trump gets in, then and NATO disintegrates, or they pull out of NATO, or they stop supporting Ukraine so much. The EU needs to be able to stand more independently from the US, and so in order to do that, then the EU needs its own kind of military to join the political and military spheres together in a more integrated fashion. And you have this issue, Germany, who said, right, we want to give 7 billion, but then if we're giving a quarter of the funding to the EU, we don't then want to be giving another 5 billion on top of that, so the EU can give a bunch of stuff. So our 7 billion that we're going to give this year needs to come off what we're giving to the EU. Otherwise, we're going to give like way more than anyone else in Europe, etc., etc. Now, you can understand the advantages possibly of bilateral assistance compared to EU, and the advantages of EU assistance compared to bilateral to Ukraine. And so these arguments, I'm sure, will go on, and each entity will fight their corners to what they think is most effective and the right way forward. I think what is clear, though, to me, is that even given that France is pretty much a quarter donor towards the EU funding, and therefore is given quite a lot of assistance to Ukraine via that route, it still lags behind, although we don't know because it doesn't really advertise what it gives to Ukraine, but it still appears to lag very much behind what, say, Germany has pledged, etc., etc. Hopefully that was of use to you. All right, let's move on to Reuters. BlackRock, JP Morgan Chase helping Kyiv raise funds for the reconstruction bank. The Ukrainian government has joined forces with BlackRock and JP Morgan Chase to launch a reconstruction bank that has already gathered 500 million in committed capital, according to Reuters. On the one hand, like banks and bankers, money, somebody's making money out of this. Is this like Ukraine being beholden to bankers going forward? And on the other hand, you got the situation like, they need money. It's got to come from somewhere. And you know what? Banks have a lot of money. And if this is banks working together to do something positive, then, we should encourage that. Norwegian government has published a press release stating that they will allocate 2 billion Norwegian kroner to increase defense production capabilities. 1 billion Norwegian kroner will go to Nammo. That's the defense military industrial entity, with the ASAP program for the total investment in production being as much as 3 billion Norwegian kroner. So it's an upping of ammunition production, of course, it will be part of that, but increased production capacities as according to the Norwegians. Now here, Ukraine's feared mammoth drone, the Baba Yaga, is capable of carrying and precisely dropping 4 TM62 mines, each with 7.5 kilogram, 17 pounds of explosive charge. Now, these mines, as far as I understand it, have a greater explosive charge, or more explosives than a shell, like an artillery shell. So actually, these large drones, the problem is they are quite easy to spot and loud compared to very small drones, but they can carry effectively 4 shells, artillery shells, or more than that, and drop them on Russian targets, and that is really very useful. Here we have, I don't know why that went crazy. Video test of a Ukrainian kamikaze drone with a jet engine here. Obviously, that enables it to be far more maneuverable. You're not really going to be needing to loop-de-loops in the sky, but this shows an evolution of Ukrainian capabilities with regards to drone manufacturing. They are obviously going to be much noisier, and that will make them more vulnerable in the air. But then the flip side is they're a lot quicker. You fly them close to the ground. They can probably, avoid radar acquisition, and could be particularly useful. Now, this is in answer, one would assume, to the news that the Russians have developed a jet version of the Shahed, which is going to be really challenging for Ukrainian air defenses. So, a bit of tit for tat. This is what we'd expect, in this war, really. Indeed, on that subject, Ukraine Victory Drones founder and vet Maria Berlinska has raised the alarms that Russia is surpassing Ukraine in drone development. A self-proclaimed realist, often called a pessimist, she says society needs honesty about war, not just a warm bath of propaganda. It's really important. So there are lots of claims that the Russian drone industry is outproducing and indeed out designing drones compared to Ukraine. This is why it's really helpful to have, German pledges from Hydron there, getting those RQ drones to Ukraine. Other, Latvia getting together and saying we need a coalition of drone manufacturers and designers and whatnot. So hopefully the allied nations to Ukraine can come to the help of Ukraine in that respect. And they are really trying very hard to really up their drone design and manufacturing themselves, but they are up against Russia that are able to get ahead at the moment, it seems, according to some quarters, in terms of drone capabilities. Right, when we talk about air defense systems, a big blow to the manufacturers who made Patriot. This is the most powerful air defense system in the world. The Russians are in shock, and I will tell you honestly, our partners are also in shock. This is what Zelensky said. Now, I think this is a really interesting claim from Zelensky, so Patriot, everyone knew before this war that Patriot is good, right? But it's not, like, with a lot of weapons, they have limited experience of being applied in a war. Right, so something like Patriot, particularly, is more of a defensive weapon. You might have these littered around Washington and New York and whatnot, but you generally don't take them out to the front line in Afghanistan, etc., etc. And so, it often the evaluation of how good they are and what their capabilities are is somewhat wanting because there isn't that real world experience. Actually, they've been applied. There are 3 batteries at least, and a couple more launchers are being used in Ukraine. And the feedback that the Americans are going to be getting about the Patriot will be absolutely phenomenal. And they'll be so happy to find out the successes, find out the challenges, and then improve on the challenges. And this will then create a greater product for the benefit of the US, who will be themselves having the very best versions of them, you can rest assured. So that's really interesting that not only have they been successful, but this has shocked the Russians, but also shocked the Americans in a good way. Sweden does not exclude the provision of JAS 39 Gripen aircraft to Ukraine. However, the decision is related to Sweden's accession to NATO. That's according to Swedish Foreign Minister Tobias Billström in Davos. We already knew that, but that is very much explicit now from what he says. So once Sweden gets into NATO, Gripens will find their way to Ukraine's front lines. They are, one assumes, being trained on them, ready for that. It's not a case of not putting the preparatory things in place first. Canada has urged the US to expedite the transfer of NASAM, so that's the more of a medium range air defense system, anti-aircraft missile system to Ukraine. It was paid for in March 2023, but there's been this big delay and it still hasn't got to Ukraine. Indeed, Alexei Reznikov has talked about, like, his nephew's just died, apparently. He was a former defense minister for Ukraine. It's now Umarov, but it was Alexei Reznikov. And he said, had that NASAMS been delivered because it would have gone in the possibly gone in a place where his nephew's died, then maybe his nephew would be alive. This is as a result of something that could be shot down by air defense. So, in other words, these delays have real world consequences. Delays stem from the need for the US-Ukraine agreement on arms sales abroad, and negotiations are still ongoing. I have no idea what is keeping that from getting it over to Ukraine. Okay. This is what Trent Telenko is saying with regard to Frankensam. So I said this earlier in my first video, but today, for the first time in combat conditions, the military use our air defense system, which Ukraine produced jointly with the United States. So it's joining up things like Buk launcher, Soviet-era launcher with Sea Sparrows, or even, AIM-9M are being used. Some people are saying perhaps even Patriot missiles could be utilized in this way. One that will utilize Patriot missiles is still in development, is a claim here. This, if true, one that will utilize Patriot missiles is still in development, means that it wasn't a Frankensam S-300 Patriot complex that downed the A-50. So he's going along with this idea that actually it could have been a Patriot system that down the A-50, as I said earlier. Bulgaria has still not sent the 100 armoured vehicles to Ukraine that its country's parliament approved back in December. The Bulgarian media outlet BNR reported on the 17th, citing comments made at the Parliament Defence Committee. So that's a little bit frustrating that, as I've said before, sometimes these things are pledged and it can take like a year for them to get from the country in question to Ukraine. And that's really frustrating. Slovakia's parliament has approved a change for allowing the defence ministry to green light arms exports, a shift from Prime Minister Fico's pledge not to send arms to Ukraine. Critics link this to profit motives, which fuel concerns about conflicts of government interests. And this is great. I reported at length about this previously, but it seems like that's now been more officially ratified in Parliament. There's this idea from analysts that Slovakia will continue providing aid to Ukraine, just not from Slovakian stocks, but from newly manufactured stuff, because Robert Fico is not going to say no to his own state entities or corporations in Slovakia making money, right? So that's not going to be very popular, and all the tax revenue and the employment that comes in with that. So he's going to say, yeah, you can sell all you like to Ukraine, we're just not going to provide it from government stock. So that's the main change of Fico. But he's gone back on the rhetoric was originally, we won't provide there'll be no arms going from Slovakia to Ukraine, to there'll be no arms going from Slovakian government stocks to Ukraine, which is a meaningful differentiation there. But it allows Slovakia to still support Ukraine, and Ukraine really desperately need that. Anyway, I told you it's going to be a lot of content today. That's enough from me for the aid section, and there's going to be a lot from the geopolitical section as well. Sorry, not sorry, it's just how it is. Take care, speak soon.